Comfort, I once told a room of sleepy undergraduates, is a phrase used most often by people who are very comfortable with your discomfort. They thought I was being poetic. I was being precise. The morning of my 71st birthday began the way most of my days do, with a fresh pot of tea, a heavy book, and the occasional judgment of the neighborhood cat through the front window. Spinoza sat open on my lap, his metaphysics still unreasonably optimistic for someone who died young and disappointed. Outside, the hedges were doing something wild that I no longer had the energy to prune. Inside, the house creaked only where it should, and I, despite everything, felt intact. That's the thing about old houses and old women. We both make noise when we're settling, not breaking. I was halfway through underlining a particularly smug sentence when the knock came. Not urgent, not apologetic, just entitled. One of those knocks that says, "I have a key, but I'm being polite." I didn't rush. People who knock like that rarely bring anything worth hurrying for. At the door stood Miranda, my only child, dressed in what I assume she believes is neutral beige but reads to me as passive aggression in cardigan form. Behind her was her husband, Darren. He was holding a cake like it had personally offended him. "Happy birthday, Mom," Miranda said, with the kind of brittle smile usually reserved for forced apologies in church pews. "We thought we'd surprise you." "You did," I said flatly. Though I confess I expected something with a bow, not a tax deduction in loafers. Darren laughed, too loud. Miranda didn't. They came in without asking, which is something I've noticed children do more confidently once you've grieved their father. They assume ownership of your silence. The cake was lemon, store-bought. I hate lemon. I poured tea anyway. Earl Grey, unsweetened. They always forget that. We sat in the living room where the air was calm and the judgments invisible but heavy. Miranda made conversation like she was threading a needle she couldn't see. Darren commented on the size of the study. Surprisingly spacious, really. And I could already feel it, the blueprint forming in his skull. Then Miranda leaned forward, both hands around her mug like a peace offering made of ceramic. "So," she began, and I should have known then. Nothing good ever follows so, when it's paired with a fake smile and an agenda. "We've been thinking," she said, "that since Darren's parents are getting older too, and your place is so spacious, it might make sense for them to stay here a while, just until things settle." I didn't say anything. Silence is a tactic. She continued, "We could convert Dad's old study. They'd have privacy. You could take the guest room for now. Or if it's easier, maybe we can help you find a nice condo nearby. You'd have your independence and—" "My independence," I interrupted, "is not a subscription service you get to renew on my behalf." Miranda flushed. Darren coughed into his cake. I sipped my tea. They'd rehearsed this, likely in bed or over breakfast, the way people plan moving a desk or replacing drapes, as if I were a logistical inconvenience, a footprint to reduce, a problem to solve with real estate. The room suddenly felt smaller, not because of the suggestion, but because of how easily it came, like they had been waiting for the right moment to present the decision already made in their heads. "I see," I said finally. Miranda gave me that smile again, the one children reserve for parents they've decided are no longer useful. "It's not that we don't want you here. We just thought you'd be more comfortable." "Comfort," I said, setting down my cup, "is a phrase used by people who are very comfortable with your discomfort." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Some words carry weight without volume, especially when spoken in a house someone else has just tried to take. The tea had gone cold. I hadn't. Some wars start with bullets, others start with sponge cake and fake smiles. And I've survived both, though only one came wrapped in cling film and passive aggression. The lemon cake sat untouched, a soft, collapsing thing on a glass plate I didn't remember owning. Miranda cut 3 slices with the clinical precision of someone pretending this visit wasn't a siege. Darren, bless his mediocrity, had already helped himself to seconds. His fork clinked against the plate like a metronome of forced charm. I watched him chew. He chewed like a man trying to stay ahead of a lie. Small talk is an art form, and Darren was finger painting. "So," he said, mouth still half full, "you still teach those, constitutional philosophy classes?" I retired. "Oh, wow. I didn't know. You didn't ask." He blinked like I'd slapped him with a book spine. Miranda shot me a look. The kind of look daughters give mothers who refuse to play the grateful elder. Let them squirm, I thought. I've earned the right to be inconvenient. They sat across from me like a pair of developers eyeing a plot of land, complimenting the crown molding, admiring the light in the study, asking if I'd ever considered knocking out the back wall to open up the space. "This house has good bones," Darren said, like he was eulogizing it. "And bad intentions," I muttered. He didn't hear me. Miranda did. She pivoted quickly to sentiment. "It's just, we want to keep the home in the family, you know?" "Interesting," I replied. I was under the impression it already was. She flushed, a minor victory. From the corner of my eye, I watched Darren's phone screen light up. A notes app open. I couldn't read the full line, but I caught fragments. Closet depth, check. Call mover about built-ins. They were cataloging the space like vultures with spreadsheets. It was then I noticed the curtains, not the ones on the window, the ones in the catalog Darren had pulled from his bag, now open between his elbow and the edge of my antique table. He tapped a photo of gauzy beige panels, holding it toward Miranda with the subtlety of a tax audit. She nodded. That was the moment I realized they'd already picked them out. The curtains, the rug, likely the paint color. They weren't asking for my blessing. They were timing my departure. This wasn't a visit. This was a soft coup. I stood, slowly, so they'd have to watch every movement. Darren half rose like a man unsure whether to offer help or flee. "I'm just getting more tea," I said. "Don't worry, the walls won't bite. Yet." In the kitchen I took my time, boiled the water fresh, rewound their words in my head, studied the silence between them. When I returned, I handed Miranda her cup without speaking. "Thanks, Mom," she said too quickly. "For the tea?" I asked. "Or for not calling the locksmith?" Darren choked slightly on a crumb. They laughed nervously. Soft coup. I stood, slowly, so they'd have to watch every movement. Darren half rose like a man unsure whether to offer help or flee. "I'm just getting more tea," I said. "Don't worry, the walls won't bite. Yet." In the kitchen, I took my time, boiled the water fresh, rewound their words in my head, studied the silence between them. When I returned, I handed Miranda her cup without speaking. "Thanks, Mom," she said too quickly. "For the tea?" I asked. "Or for not calling the locksmith?" Darren choked slightly on a crumb. They laughed nervously. I didn't. "You've been quiet," Miranda said. "I'm thinking," I replied. "About what?" "About how many coats of paint it takes to erase a legacy." They didn't understand. That was fine. The most dangerous women I've ever known rarely needed to explain themselves. We sat in silence again. Miranda fiddled with the hem of her sleeve. Darren checked his phone. I picked up the cake knife and turned it slowly in my hand, not as a threat, but as a metaphor. "You know," I said calmly, "some people leave houses to their children. Others leave them through their children." They didn't ask what I meant. They never do when the sentence ends in silence. Grief is a more faithful companion than family. At least it never pretends to love you. Family shows up with cake. Grief doesn't knock. That night, after they left, I poured myself a neat 2 fingers of Glenfarclas and opened the safe in the hallway closet. It sits behind a shelf of unread biographies, the kind people give you when they think you're lonely enough to want someone else's story. I turned the dial slowly. Schist. Dvatsiat Odin. Tritsiat Tri. My wedding anniversary, my daughter's birthday, and the date I decided I would never remarry. That last one never changes. Inside, tucked between my husband's will and an old fountain pen I refused to replace, was the deed. Cream paper, blue ink, the seal slightly faded but still legible. Joint ownership transferred to Elsbeth Rowan upon death of Jonathan Rowan, in full and permanent possession. I ran a hand along the edge of the document, the same way one might touch a gravestone, reverent, but certain. The house was mine, not because I had claimed it, but because he had made sure no one else could. Jonathan had always been a forward thinker, at least when it came to land and law. He once told me, if you want to see a person's real face, put a fence between them and something they think they deserve. He added a final clause, one I'd forgotten about until now. A paragraph written in his usual, infuriatingly precise script. To be inherited only by those who remember who this home was built for, and why. Not what it was built for, not when, who, and why. Two questions Miranda had never bothered to ask. I could still picture Jonathan in the study, books stacked around him like fortifications. He wore slippers that squeaked and had a habit of talking to the walls when deep in thought. He once called the fireplace our diplomatic embassy. I never asked what that meant. I liked the mystery of it. Miranda used to sit on that same hearth and draw pictures of castles. Now she wants to turn the study into a shared lounge space with neutral tones. It's not just the house they want, it's the erasure of who we were in it. I tucked the deed back into the envelope and sealed it. Then I placed it back inside the safe and turned the dial, slower this time. The kind of slowness that says I know where the power sits. And it's not in your Pinterest board, sweetheart. There's a certain kind of stupidity that comes wrapped in confidence. Miranda and Darren had it in spades, the dumb sort of clever. They thought silence meant surrender. They thought politeness meant permission. And worst of all, they thought a 71-year-old widow with a cane was an easy mark. I didn't keep the cane because I needed it. I kept it because Jonathan once leaned on it during our last walk together. And I knew if I ever had to swing something heavy with one hand, it would do the job nicely. Later that evening, I took out my notebook. The black one with the red spine. I only use it for moments of preemptive clarity. Not quite revenge, not quite grief, just evidence in progress. I wrote, "They want the study. They've never read a single book inside it." I paused, then added, "The curtains were decided before the conversation. The battle has already started." I closed the notebook and set it by my bedside. The deed was safe, the intentions were not. As I turned off the lamp, I said out loud, to the walls, to the study, maybe to Jonathan, they think I'm alone. They forget this house was built with a memory in every brick. And unlike family, memory doesn't lie. Sometimes the most dangerous things come in child-proof caps. Not everything toxic comes with a skull and crossbones. Some come with instructions and polite intentions. It was the day after their visit, the one with the cake, the curtain catalog, and the power play in slow motion. I was wiping down the kitchen counter when I opened the drawer beside the stove and found something that didn't belong. A bottle, small, plastic, amber-colored, no label. Just a strip of tape with, "For sleep, one nightly," scribbled in Darren's handwriting. I know his handwriting. It's the kind that overcompensates, all blocky letters and unnecessary underlines. Like he's afraid someone will question the authority of his lowercase t. I hadn't bought this. I hadn't taken anything new. And I certainly hadn't invited anyone to reorganize my supplements, which meant someone had been poking around. Not during a visit, during an absence. And unlike grief, this bottle didn't belong here. I held it up to the light. The pills inside were pale green and oddly shaped, not the usual over-the-counter fare. No branding, no manufacturer, just a rattling silence that made my teeth ache. I didn't panic. That's a young woman's mistake. I got quiet, which is how old women survive. I slipped the bottle into my cardigan pocket, walked calmly to the study, and sat down at the desk. Not the one with the fountain pens, the other one. The one with the locked drawer and the legal firepower. I pulled out the number I hadn't used in 5 years. Charles Bellamy, attorney, iron stomach, no children. He answered on the second ring, like he'd been expecting trouble. "Elsbeth?" "Yes." "You only call when it's serious?" It's not serious, I said. Not yet, but it's looking ambitious. We scheduled a meeting. Quiet, discreet, no paper trail yet. Just the beginnings of a protective perimeter. After I hung up, I made myself a cup of tea. No sugar, no lemon, just scalding heat and a long exhale. As I waited for the kettle, my eyes drifted toward the cookie jar, an old ceramic thing shaped like a goose. Hideous. Gifted by a student who confused my tolerance for baking metaphors with a fondness for whimsy. I opened it, still full of shortbread from last December. But the jar wasn't the point. The placement was. It had been moved, slightly, just enough for someone tall to reach easily. Darren. It clicked. They were trying to make it easy, just one pill a night, for sleep, for peace, for calm, and eventually, for compliance. Jonathan once told me, years ago, over a glass of red wine and a case study on elder exploitation. Control starts small, a pill here, a signature there. You won't feel it until you've already said yes to something you didn't hear. I remember that because I wrote it in the margin of his obituary draft, and underlined it twice. I didn't cry. Instead, I reached for my black notebook, the one with the red spine. And I wrote, "The cookie jar has been moved. The pills are not mine. Darren's handwriting, labeled for sleep. Intent unclear, motive not." I slid the notebook back into its hiding place, poured my tea, and stared at the bottle one more time before wrapping it in wax paper and slipping it beneath the floorboard in the pantry. I've read enough wills to know this wasn't about care. This was about preparing the battlefield. And they were underestimating me again, confusing gray hair with soft judgment, mistaking tea for surrender, mistaking a quiet woman for a compliant one. They'll learn soon enough. I don't start wars. I finish them. Let people speak long enough and they'll tell you everything you need to ruin them. You just have to pour the tea and keep refilling their cup. Darren began showing up more often. Not all at once, just enough to suggest coincidence. A dropped-off newspaper. An offer to help take the bins out. A spontaneous visit with a smile too tight and a folder too thick. Men like Darren believe in proximity as persuasion. He called it checking in. I called it reconnaissance. The first time he brought coffee. Cheap, burnt-smelling, and in a cup that said, "World's Best Boss." A subtle threat, I thought. He stood awkwardly in my doorway like someone hoping I'd step aside on principle. I didn't. He shuffled in, complimented the curtains, his future curtains, and then asked, "Have you ever thought about getting your affairs in order? You know, just in case?" "My affairs," I replied, "have been in order since you still needed Velcro shoes." He laughed, too hard, like he didn't understand the insult, only that it sounded like one. I offered tea instead, Earl Grey, unsweetened as always. He followed me into the kitchen, looking around like a man calculating square footage by eye. That night, I moved the sugar bowl 2 inches to the left. The next day, I unscrewed the bottom and taped a voice recorder inside. I've lived too long to trust men who offer help with legal documents and bring cake as a lubricant. By the 4th visit, Darren stopped pretending he came for the company. He started bringing brochures. Senior living communities with robust social calendars. Assisted housing with elevator access and morning tai chi. He mentioned things like fall risk, ease of estate transition, and the burden of upkeep. I sipped my tea, smiled, offered a biscuit I didn't bake, and let the recorder do its work. "Miranda's been so worried," he said once, leaning forward like I was hard of hearing. "She just wants to know everything's secure, safe, you know." "I'm quite safe," I said calmly. "I sleep with a legal pad under my pillow and a husband's ghost at the foot of the bed." He didn't know where to look after that. Eventually, he started leaving documents behind. Drafts, proposals, half-filled forms with helpful post-it notes like, "Just needs your initials." I never touched them. Instead, I made notes in my black notebook. Darren suggests early estate planning, pushes ease of transition language, gaslights using politeness, quotes numbers as comfort, never once asks how I'm doing. He kept coming, and I kept refilling his tea, perfectly timed, letting the sound of the kettle cover my silence while he filled the room with assumptions. That's the thing about men like Darren. They think a woman's silence is either approval or absence. They never consider it might be collection. One afternoon, I asked if he liked the tea. "It's excellent," he said, sipping carefully. "What is it?" "Testimony," I said, with a hint of lemon. He didn't laugh, but the recorder under the sugar bowl caught every word. Curiosity killed the cat, and in this case, maybe the marriage. Some doors aren't locked because they're hiding something. They're locked to test who tries anyway. I never told Darren that Jonathan's study was off limits. I didn't need to. The door, like my silence, was supposed to mean something. That's the problem with opportunists. They interpret boundaries as invitations. It was a Tuesday. Damp, indifferent, and uneventful. Until I heard the faint creak of the floorboard by the study door, the one that only groans when someone's trying not to step on it. I stood quietly in the hallway, just outside his line of sight. The door was open. Inside, Darren, hunched over my late husband's desk, flipping through one of the annotated binders labeled Rowan Estate, Trust Revision Drafts. No gloves, no shame. Just fingers smudging margins he couldn't possibly understand. Jonathan used to say, "A man's intelligence is measured by how he behaves around information he isn't entitled to." By that standard, Darren was very, very stupid. I didn't speak at first. I watched. His mouth was slightly open, like he was concentrating harder than usual, which for Darren meant reading without moving his lips. He was scribbling something in a small notepad, the kind realtors use. The kind that screams, "I'm not technically committing fraud, but give me a minute." Then I stepped in. "Comfortable?" I asked. He jumped, flushed, closed the binder too quickly, the kind of guilty reflex you see in students who just peeked at someone else's test. "Oh, Elsbeth," he said, forcing a laugh. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't. Startling requires a surprise." He straightened his posture like a schoolboy caught in the principal's chair. "I was just curious," he said, "about how it all works, in case anything happens." In case anything happens. That was the phrase. That's what slipped. I said nothing, just walked across the room, retrieved the binder from under his elbow and placed it gently back in the locked cabinet. I didn't even look at him when I turned the key. I wrote the phrase down the moment I left the room, word for word. In case anything happens. People think murder comes with a gun or a knife. Sometimes it comes in a sentence, and if you're lucky, they'll hand it to you themselves. At dinner that night, I set an extra fork on the table, out of habit or memory, or maybe as a warning. Darren asked who it was for. "The ghost of a man who knew what a boundary was," I said, slicing into my chicken. He laughed again, nervously. Miranda didn't show. She was busy. Likely she was complicit. I cleared the table with one hand and set the black notebook on the counter, the one with the red spine and the calm rage inside it. 6:42 p.m. Darren caught inside study. Phrase, "in case anything happens." Binder, estate documents, no invitation, no apology. I added a post-it with one word, intent. I sat with that word for a long time. Intent is the space between accident and strategy. And Darren had just crossed the line. He thinks he's clever, thinks politeness is a shield, thinks a smile is enough to cover theft. But you can't fake understanding law to a woman who spent 4 decades teaching it. And you definitely can't steal legacy from someone who's already buried it. The study is more than a room. It's a graveyard of memory, margins, and marriage. And Darren just pissed on it in loafers. You don't have to haunt a house when you are the house. People forget that walls remember more than they do, and some of us never left, even after the funeral. The invitation was my idea. I wanted to see them all in one place, Miranda, Darren, and his parents, the would-be squatters of a legacy they hadn't earned. I set the table for 5, not 4, 5. The 6th setting, Jonathan's, stayed in the cabinet. That absence had more presence than any of them combined. I used the good linen, not because they deserved it, but because I did. The wine glasses were crystal, Jonathan's. They hadn't touched the light since his memorial. I polished them slowly, deliberately, each stem a reminder of who this house was built for, and who was not invited to inherit it. That night the air smelled like rosemary and rot. Only one of them belonged to the recipe. They arrived dressed like real estate agents attending a wake. Miranda wore soft pastels, as if innocence could be stitched into a blouse. Darren wore cologne, too much of it, like a man hoping his scent would distract from what he couldn't say. Darren's mother, June, complimented the crown molding within 45 seconds of entering the house. His father, Walter, looked around with the quiet hunger of someone who's read enough obituaries to know how property passes hands. "You've kept the place so lovely," June said, eyes glinting. "I do try," I replied, to avoid letting things rot in plain sight. We sat down for dinner. I served coq au vin, Jonathan's favorite, slow-cooked, deeply seasoned, and subtly threatening. The kind of meal that says I remember everything, including the recipe and the betrayal. Darren praised the wine. "It's got weight," he said. "It was bottled the year Jonathan proposed," I replied. He stopped mid-sip. Conversation turned toward the future, theirs specifically. June mentioned how difficult it had been finding a quiet place in Florida, how family support was more valuable than property values. Walter chimed in that multi-generational homes were the new thing, as if erasure came with a trend forecast. "Have you ever thought about relocating?" June asked me. "Only when I walk past the garbage bins," I said, smiling. They didn't laugh. They blinked. That was enough. Miranda cleared her throat. "We just want what's best for everyone," she said. "Then you should have stayed home," I answered. "Mom, no, finish your chicken. And tell me, did you bring blueprints or will you just take measurements when I'm in the bathroom?" Silence. The wine glasses glinted under the chandelier like they'd heard everything before. They had. I looked around the table. 4 people, each with their own strategy, none with the subtlety to realize the war was already lost. And me? I didn't have to haunt the place. I was the place. Every baseboard, every floorboard, every curtain rod had passed through my hands. I knew which stairs creaked, which drawer stuck, which window caught the sunrise just right in winter. They thought they were inheriting a structure. What they were standing inside was me. And I don't transfer title without a fight. As dessert was served, fruit tart with a crust so sharp it could cut lips, I raised my glass and said, "To memory, the kind that doesn't fade when the paperwork clears." They drank, but none of them asked what I meant. If they want your house, make sure they choke on the paperwork first. And if they bring forms to steal it, make sure they leave with copies that cut. The folder was left behind like an afterthought, tucked under Darren's coat on the entry bench, barely visible, but exactly visible enough, not forgotten, placed. I saw it the moment I closed the door behind them. Burgundy faux leather, gold-trimmed corners, the kind of thing chosen by people who believe aesthetics will distract from intent. I didn't touch it immediately. I brewed tea first, not out of ritual, but because I enjoy reading betrayal with a hot beverage in hand. Once seated, I opened it slowly, the way you'd open a letter from the IRS or a lover you know has stopped loving you. Inside, a drafted power of attorney, unsigned but filled in. My full name, written clean across the top in Darren's meticulous, try-hard handwriting. Miranda listed as primary agent, Darren, of course, as secondary. And a soft blue sticky note on the final page, "Just in case, we can help you sort it later." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a preamble to a theft. I closed the folder, took a breath, then went to the study and turned on the copier. It hummed with the satisfaction of a woman who's been waiting for her moment. I made 2 copies. One went into the fireproof box in the hall closet, right between Jonathan's will and the notarized letter I had written the night after the funeral. The other? That one got the Elsbeth treatment. I slid the folder back where I found it. Tucked inside, on top of the sticky note, I added a new sticky note, pale yellow, my handwriting crisp and scathing. I don't recall this being on the menu. No threats, no accusations, just a reminder that I was not asleep at the wheel, and if they wanted to drive this vehicle, they'd better learn how to steer through hell. The next day, Miranda called. "Mom, Darren thinks he left a folder at your place." "Did he?" "I think it's burgundy leather. Has some forms." "Yes," I said. "I returned it. It's on your porch." I added a note: silence. Not confusion, recognition. They didn't call back. Instead, I received an email from Darren the next morning, CC'd to a conveniently friendly lawyer named Brett, with a LinkedIn photo that screamed soft inheritance laundering. The email asked if I'd had time to reflect on long-term planning. I marked it unread and dragged it into a folder labeled Amateurs. That evening, I added a new entry to my black notebook: Power of Attorney, pre-filled, notarized intention lacking, left behind accidentally, escalation observed, weaponized incompetence noted, underlined once, no exclamation point. I don't need punctuation for war. Later, as I poured a glass of wine into one of Jonathan's untouched glasses, I said aloud, more to the walls than to the air. If they want control, they'll need more than forms and flattery. They'll need a resurrection. Because what they failed to understand is that I've already outlived everything they're using against me. Age, loneliness, silence, even sentiment. They brought paper to a courtroom I built from bone. And they've forgotten the oldest rule in jurisprudence. Possession may be 9/10 of the law, but memory is 10/10 of survival. Love that speaks in legal terms is rarely speaking to you. It's speaking to your assets. And if they say practically before they say love, what they really mean is, this would be easier if you weren't in the way. Miranda came alone, which meant one of two things. Either Darren had finally been told to stay in the car, or this was the apology scene, the one where daughters cry softly, hold your hand across teacups, and pretend history can be spackled over with regret. I met her at the door in my robe, cane in hand, pen still tucked behind my ear from a crossword I didn't need help finishing. She looked pale, theatrically so, the kind of pallor one acquires not from grief but from staging. "Can we talk?" she asked. "We've proven that's possible," I replied. "Effective? Unclear." She stepped inside like she was afraid the walls would remember. They would. I gestured toward the kitchen with my cane, not my hand. Words are weapons. Gestures are boundaries. I chose the latter. She didn't want tea. That was new. She sat at the counter, her hands folded like a child waiting for forgiveness she didn't think she needed. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she began. "Ah," I thought, the opening act. She sighed. "You're alone, Mom. I know you don't want to hear it, but it's time to let go of the past. Think practically. The house is too big, too much for you to manage." I poured myself tea, Earl Grey, scalding, and said nothing. She continued, sensing my silence as weakness. They always do. "We just want to help. Darren and we're trying to build something stable. Multi-generational living is efficient," I interrupted, "and economical, and perfectly on trend, I'm sure. Don't twist this." I handed her a tissue, not out of sympathy, out of structure. She blinked. "No response?" she asked. "I'm thinking," I said. "About what?" "About how often love talks logistics before it asks how you're sleeping." Her mouth tightened. "It's not like that, isn't it? You're being cruel." That made me laugh. Not loudly, just enough. "Cruel," I said, "is tricking your mother into brunch and slipping her a draft power of attorney between the menu and the toast." Silence. I let it stretch. She looked down at her hands. "I'm sorry," she said. That would have worked if she hadn't followed it with, "But we do need to start thinking about next steps." And there it was, the switch. The apology had an invoice, and the love had a signature line. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out the copy of the unsigned document. I'd annotated it in red, like a professor correcting a poorly argued essay. I slid it toward her. She stared at it. "Mom, if you ever try this again," I said calmly, I will make sure the only thing you inherit from me is the legal bill. She stood up, fast, too fast. Theatrics again. But this wasn't drama, this was documentation. She left without another word. I didn't follow. Instead, I opened my notebook, the black one with the red spine, and wrote, apology followed by justification. Crocodile tears. Strategic pause. No actual remorse. Pitch the idea of letting go of the past while actively trying to steal its foundation. Then I underlined the final note. This isn't about love. This is about leverage. And as always, I added the time and date. Not for memory. For court, if it came to that. If they wanted inheritance, they should have invested in kindness. Estates aren't won with blood or signatures. They're earned in the quiet years when no one's watching, and lost when they think you aren't. I wrote the letter in black ink. Of course. Typed letters lack conviction. Email lacks soul. But ink bleeds intention, and I wanted every clause to feel final. The day after Miranda's performance, all sighs, silk sleeves, and weaponized concern, I sat at Jonathan's desk and rewrote the future. With the same pen I used to sign our mortgage. With the same legal mind she thought had softened with age. It hadn't softened, it had crystallized. The first envelope went to Charles Bellamy, my lawyer, a man who once cross-examined a judge and somehow walked out with the bench's respect and a box of Danish. Inside, a notarized revision of my will, an addendum on inheritance stipulations, and a clause that began with, to be executed in the event of coercion, manipulation, or undue familial pressure. The second envelope, hand-addressed sealed with wax, went to Miranda. No return address, no affection, just wait. Inside, a single typed page. This house will not be inherited. It will be transformed. Upon my passing, it will be placed in a legal trust and converted into a residence for older women who have been financially, emotionally, or legally undermined by their families. I paused before typing the final line. Then I wrote, this home was not built to be taken. It was built to outlast those who try. I signed it, folded it, and pressed it flat. No explanation. No apology. You don't explain to thieves why the vault is locked. You let them rattle the handle until they exhaust themselves. Afterward, I stood in the kitchen and stared at the kettle as it screamed. Not boiling water, more like old rage in vapor form. I took my tea outside, sat on the porch, and watched the hydrangeas wilt from the summer heat. They're dramatic that way, all show and collapse. Miranda would understand that. A week passed. No call, no knock, no reply. Silence, finally used correctly. I imagined her opening the letter. I imagined Darren reading it over her shoulder, his expression falling in that exact shade of financial disappointment you can't teach. Only recognize in men who just realized the house was never theirs to calculate. That night, I made a new entry in my notebook. Will revised, home redirected, emotional blackmail neutralized, legal framework solid, blood does not entitle, history does underlined 3 times. No embellishment. This wasn't sentiment. This was structure. I opened a bottle of the good wine, Jonathan's, the one we saved for celebrations of certainty. He would have approved. Probably poured it for me, muttering something about irony and justice having matching hands. I toasted the empty chair across the table, not to grief, but to closure. The lock on the gate clicked shut that evening, figuratively and literally. And as the sun slid behind the roofline of a house they thought they could inherit, I whispered, to no one in particular, you were never cut out to own this place. You tried to break it with ink. I rewrote it in stone. It's not revenge. It's just responsible estate management. There's nothing petty about protecting what you built from people who only want the keys. The locksmith arrived at 7:03 a.m., not because I'm paranoid. I simply prefer preventative measures to eulogies. I served him coffee in a chipped mug that read, "Women who behave rarely make wills worth reading." He didn't ask questions. He changed every lock with the quiet efficiency of a man who's seen too many families fight over oak cabinets and emotional real estate. "Big house," he said. "Big memory," I replied. By 9:30, the gate code had been reset. By 10 o'clock, the camera system was synced to my phone. By noon, I had placed a sealed envelope on the hallway table marked, "For Miranda," in case she knocks before screaming. I knew they were coming. They'd said move-in day like it was a shared holiday. Miranda had texted the week before with cheerful certainty. "We'll be there Sunday morning with the moving van. Darren's parents are so grateful. Can't wait to settle in." I never replied. Instead, I prepped the front foyer like a lawyer sets up trial exhibits. Clean, precise, and unforgiving. A thermos sat beside the envelope. Black coffee. Bitter, of course. Next to it, a tri-fold brochure for a mid-range hotel just outside of town. Dog-friendly, queen beds, enough comfort to quiet a tantrum but nowhere near enough to feel like home. Hospitality without invitation. That was the theme. They arrived late, of course. Miranda in a floral dress 2 decades too young for sincerity, Darren in his usual smug casual slouch, and Darren's parents trailing behind like they expected a welcome parade. Miranda tried the front door, twice. It didn't budge. She knocked. I didn't answer. She knocked again, louder, that entitled rhythm people use when they believe delay equals disrespect. Then the shouting began. "Mom? Mom, open the door. You said, we made plans." I opened the door just enough to step into the threshold, cane in hand, expression unreadable. Behind me, the foyer was pristine, cold, empty of welcome. "Morning," I said. Her face tightened. Darren's jaw flexed. "What is this?" Miranda hissed. "Boundaries," I replied. She stepped forward. I didn't move. "You said we could move in." I said no such thing. You assumed. There's a difference. "We hired movers. Darren's parents are alive," I interrupted. "Congratulations." I handed her the thermos first, then the brochure. "You'll find the prices are reasonable and the linen's absorbent. Tell June I recommend room 214, less street noise." She stared at the brochure like it had insulted her ancestors. "You can't do this," she snapped. "Correction," I said. "I already did. You've lost your mind. Possibly, but not my title, not the deed, not the passwords." She blinked. Darren tried to speak. I turned to him. "If you finish that sentence, I'll have you removed by someone who charges by the hour and files incident reports in triplicate." He didn't finish it. I closed the door. Slowly, politely, but completely. Inside, I leaned my cane against the wall, poured myself a fresh cup of tea, and turned on my favorite aria. Not because I was gloating, because I was practicing what they never understood. Peace is louder when it's chosen, and as the sound of tires squealing off my gravel drive filled the silence, I muttered, not bitter, just exact. You were never moving in. You were being moved out. Peace isn't what you feel when it's quiet. It's what you feel when you've made it quiet, on purpose. The porch had always been Jonathan's favorite place to sit after sundown. He liked the creak of the swing, the old wood beneath his heels, and the way the light above the door never quite reached the steps. "A house should glow," he once said, "not beg." That evening, the glow was steady. Dimensions decided. I sat with my tea, unsweetened naturally, and a key resting in my lap. Not just any key. The new one. The final one. The only one. No copies, no emergencies, no just-in-case stashed in Miranda's glove box. Just mine. The house behind me exhaled the way old homes do when they've weathered something. Not wind or rain, but people. And survived them. There was no more shouting, no more knocks, no more plans arriving dressed as affection. Silence at last felt earned. And silence, when it's yours, sounds a lot like applause. Across the lawn, the hydrangeas had started to bounce back. I'd trimmed them the day after the move-in. Not aggressively. Just enough to remind them that wild things can still be pruned into shape. That's how I felt too. I hadn't told anyone about the will revision. Not the press, not the neighbors, not even Charles. though he'd find out soon enough when the board papers for the foundation were filed. Rowan House, that's what it would be called. A home for women who'd been cornered, controlled, or cleverly written out of their own lives. It wouldn't be flashy, but it would be safe. And it would be loud with women who remember what it costs to stay silent too long. I lifted the key and held it between my fingers, not for show, for weight. They always underestimated how much a key could mean to someone who'd once been asked, politely, to leave her own life behind. I didn't leave. I stayed. I watched. I wrote everything down, and then I rewrote the ending. Miranda hadn't called. I doubted she would. The performance was over, and without the promise of a stage or a signature, she'd gone quiet. Darren was likely licking his wounds in a spreadsheet somewhere, still trying to understand how he lost the house without ever hearing me raise my voice. But that was the point, wasn't it? I don't fight like they do. I addition. And there's no paragraph in hell long enough to outlast a woman who rewrites things in ink. The porch light flickered once and steadied. A moth circled it like it was trying to figure out the geometry of safety. I watched it quietly, not with interest, with recognition. Behind me, the house gave another long, groaning sigh. It wasn't tired, just relieved. I reached for the black notebook on the table, the one with the red spine, the one full of details that could bury a law office, and added one final line. Closure is not something they give you. It's something you take, one page at a time. Then I closed it. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to underline anything. I took the key, slipped it into my robe pocket, and leaned back against the swing. The breeze was cool. The night was steady. The house, mine.